next presenter is Carole Willans. She is hard of hearing and a Canadian lawyer who wears cochlear implant and a hearing aid. Her profound bilateral hearing loss is the result of a head trauma when she was 4. She has significant experience as a mentor for persons with hearing loss, mostly online, but sometimes also in person. Carole was recently elected as General Secretary of the International Federation of Hard of Hearing, and she previously served for 21 years on the board of directors of the Canadian Hard of Hearing Association, and the last 6 as national president. So we look forward to your presentation, Carole, from your experience in Canada.
Thanks, Leo. My presentation is focused on peer mentoring and how it's a powerful tool for personal development. And I will conclude at the end with information on what I consider to be a model peer mentoring program. Next slide. So CIICA's 2022 survey indicates that peer support or peer mentoring is an important service that's needed by CI candidates and CI users. CI candidates to make the decision for implantation, and CI users in ensuring their adaptation. Next slide. So mentorship is a relationship between 2 people, where one has more experience and knowledge in a certain field, that's the mentor, and the mentee, of course, is the person who receives the guidance from the person with the more experience. Now, but peer mentoring takes it a step further. It's a type of mentorship that occurs between a person who has lived through a specific experience, it's a lived experience, and a person who is new to that experience. Next slide, please. So for hard of hearing people, peer mentoring involves a mentor who is a hard of hearing person with experience living successfully with hearing loss. For example, a successful CI user. A mentee is a person who's having difficulty dealing with issues related to hearing loss. That includes, for example, adjusting to a cochlear implant. Now, mentoring in this context is particularly powerful because of what I like to call the shared identity that underlies the relationship. This is particularly true when the mentor is an experienced CI user and the mentee is a CI candidate or a CI user with less experience. It's all about the shared journey. Next slide, please. So my introduction to peer mentoring was in my professional life. As a young female lawyer starting out, and I had a hearing loss, I had a lot of hurdles to overcome. I sought the guidance of senior lawyers for several years. And then one of them gave me the best advice of all, and that is, it was my turn to become a mentor. So this story was repeated in the case of my cochlear implant. Soon after I hit my 50s, my hearing declined further. 2 hearing aids were no longer sufficient. So I was in a spot of despair. I knew about cochlear implants. I was afraid of surgery. I was afraid of losing what little hearing I had left. But then a friend of mine who had received an implant a few years earlier stepped up, and she provided guidance and support both before and after implantation. So she acted as my mentor. And since then, I have in turn acted as a mentor for others, including many struggling with the idea of whether they should get an implant or getting used to their implant. Next slide, please. So peer mentoring can take 2 forms. There's one-on-one or there's groups. I prefer one-on-one because the 2 participants get to know each other well. And this ensures that the support is tailored to the needs of the mentee. Group Peer mentoring takes the form of a meeting of people with varying levels of experience. For cochlear implants, you often see these groups linked to a CI clinic or in a hospital's audiology department. Now, this can be helpful to mentees who have no other way to find a mentor, but there is a potential pitfall of such groups that everybody's inexperienced in the group. That happens sometimes, and there's no clear mentor. So there's a risk of having wrong or maybe negative information. Next slide, thank you. So what kind of issues can peer mentoring help with? Well, it could be about overcoming obstacles in personal relationships, in social situations, in the workplace, at school, or any other area of daily life. The focus of the discussions between the mentor and the mentee will depend on the needs of the mentor or the mentee. The goal is to help the mentee acquire or improve their skills in managing their hearing loss. I have noticed that people look for mentors in times of transition, such as changing careers, starting a new job, even joining or marrying into a family that's not familiar with hearing loss. So sometimes a person has recent onset or worsening hearing loss, or a cochlear implant is being considered, or perhaps they're having difficulty adjusting to the cochlear implant. So all of these are forms of transition, and the right mentor can help the mentee get a handle on the issues. Next slide, please. So whenever you are starting a mentoring relationship, it's important to be aware of the potential pitfalls. Now, I don't have enough time to go into the details right here, but here's a list of a few potential pitfalls for you to start thinking about this. First one, not identifying the mentee's needs. The first session between mentor and mentee should begin with a conversation about what the mentee is hoping to get out of the relationship. Not defining the commitment. From the outset, it should be decided how many check-ins will take place, whether there is a finite time frame or not, whether sessions will be in person or online. Not setting goals, that's the third one I have on my slide. Both mentor and mentees should work together to define what success looks like, both long-term and short-term. Finally, breaking trust. A mentor's role is that of a trusted advisor. Anything shared during sessions must be held in confidence. And this is a two-way street because often the mentor will also share personal stories with the mentee. So he or she is entitled to that being in confidence as well. Overall, peer mentoring is a powerful tool for personal development. The next slide, please. Yes, the Canadian Hard of Hearing Association has a peer mentoring program, which is an excellent model. After selecting several leaders from within its community, the association sets up a web-based mentoring program. And you can find it online at the link that you see on the slide. Mentees who apply are linked to one of the mentors that have been identified by the association. Conversations occur online, by email or by an electronic platform, for example, like Zoom. Face-to-face meetings are rare because most participants are separated by great distances, and that's especially true in Canada. The website of the Canadian Hard of Hearing Association provides a lot of information on its mentoring program. It has a toolkit, frequently asked questions, and a code of conduct. It's very important to have. So I suggest you look at that. Now, thank you for changing the slide. Now, another key resource is an extremely well-written, consumer-driven policy paper published by the International Federation of Hard of Hearing People, IFO. It's on this website. And you can, if you want, you see my email on the slide. If you want to get a copy of that, you can also contact me on email to ask me for it. But in conclusion, I want to mention that peer mentoring is a safe place where the mentor and the mentee can discuss the challenges they both face as hard of hearing people, as well as celebrate their successes. It's important to do that too. And it's all about making the human connections that we all need. And remember, the strength of it, especially when it comes to cochlear implants, the real strength is based on that shared identity between cochlear implant users. So thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you very much, Carole, for this excellent presentation on peer support, peer mentorship, peer mentoring, which is a really important topic. I think a lot of countries can learn from this good example in Canada. And as Sue already mentioned in the chat, also peer mentorship came out very often in the survey suggested by CI users. Brian, are there questions and suggestions in the chat?
Yeah, there was a very specific one, Carole, about, could you say a little bit more about what the guidelines are? And there was a comment from Stuart giving a link to some other guidelines, but if you could say a bit more about what the guidelines are.
Well, I recommend that you go and look at what's written on the website that I gave you, but the guidelines have a lot to do with the things I mentioned, such as being in confidence, making sure that you have a trusting relationship between them, but also we need to know the question about whether we're dealing with a person who is looking to get an implant. It's quite a different issue with a person that has already received an implant. So the guidelines focus on connecting the right mentor with the right mentee. And yeah, and also being able to recognize that sometimes you're not able to answer the questions of a certain person. So therefore, you should suggest and go back to the association and suggest another mentor for the person. That happens sometimes too. But the guidelines are a lot of the guidelines that you would normally associate with peer mentoring generally.
Great, thank you. That's provoked a lot of discussion online, really fascinating insight into how it works.
Thank you, Brian. And thank you, Carole, for this interesting presentation.